Hey everybody, John Shutsky back. Part two of Engineering Ethics, Key Principles and Canons. Some of you may have never heard the word canons before. We're not talking about cannons like cannons on a pirate ship, but we're talking about principles, rules, commandments, guidelines. Every engineering code of ethics has a pretty similar set of these guidelines or commandments. So we're going to talk through some of those and give you a few hints in terms of how to handle some of the ethical dilemmas that may come up in your future. So here are the fundamental canons. I'm going to just go through these quickly. Number one is to hold paramount the health, safety, and welfare of the public. So one of the things I spend a lot of time, I also teach BSE 508. Those of you who are in that class, you know that, or if you've had it in the past. But it's one of the reasons why we spend so much time talking about safety and risk and failure modes and effects analysis, because engineers are the ones that are ultimately held responsible when something happens, especially if it's something that involves an engineering or designed machine, system, component, environment. Number two is to only perform services in areas of competence. You got to be a little bit careful with this. Many of you will be taking the general engineering FE exam that cuts across multiple engineering disciplines. So in our BSE program, we're pretty broad in terms of our level of coverage, but obviously if you are a food engineer or a bioprocess engineer, as an example, and you're designed to go to the city of Minneapolis and you're going to be put in charge of a bridge design project, you need to be super careful to not practice outside of your immediate level of competence. Can you gain that experience and competence? Absolutely, but until you've actually gotten that type of experience, mentorship, actually done some work in the area and practiced with or under an engineer who has that level of competence, you need to be super careful. Number three is to only issue public statements that are objective and truthful. This is really difficult right now because in our society, things are very political. Whether you're talking about maybe a fatality that's caused by a newly designed autonomous vehicle, or in the case of another licensed professional, medical doctors right now in 2020 are being asked to give their political opinions about the coronavirus epidemic and when we can open our society back up. You need to make sure that when you're doing things as an engineer, you're doing it from an objective, fact-based, data-based, obviously truthful manner, but that you do as many things as possible to avoid interjecting your own personal opinions and politics into the situation. Number four is to act for each employer or client as a faithful agent or trustee. Your loyalty really needs to go back to the people who are giving you your paycheck and that are employing you, that are entrusting you to do the work. I want to be a little bit careful with this one because when we get into the Emily case study in Module 3, I will give you an example of a person who's perhaps asked by their employer to do something that they maybe need to think twice about from an ethical perspective. But as long as ethics are good, you need to be faithful to the company and to the person or client that's paying your paycheck. Again, as long as they're asking you to do things that are ethical, that are legal, etc. The fifth one is to avoid deceptive acts. You always want to tell the truth. You always want to document your work. You never want to hide things. You never want to take shortcuts. The last one is to conduct yourselves in an honorable, responsible, ethical, and lawful way so as to enhance the honor and reputation and usefulness of the engineering profession. This is just really important because, again, if we're going to preserve the integrity and the reputation, not only of yourself, but of the industry, that's only going to be as good as the ethical contribution of each individual. When I have you do the case study, I'm actually going to ask you to use the Code of Ethics that is published by the National Society for Professional Engineers. They do maintain a current Code of Ethics, or the canons of Code of Ethics, that often then do get adopted and or modified by the various engineering associations, whether that's ASABE, ASME, American Society of Chemical, or civil engineers. Each engineering society has a slightly different code of ethics, but the National Society for Professional Engineers are the ones that kind of keep that moving. They identify new topics, new issues, and again, they're the ones that are kind of the maintainer of those canons. This is an interesting study. This was a study that was done back in 2013, I believe, by the U.S. construction industry. And they specifically did a survey, it was a big survey, of thousands of civil engineers and other professional engineers who were involved in the construction industry. And they asked them, like, where are the pressure sources? Where are the sources of pressure that lead to people having the opportunity to make questionable or unethical decisions? So you can see here adhering to a project timeline. Number two, trying to keep a project on budget. I look at these as kind of going hand in hand, number one and number two, because when you develop an engineering project budget, oftentimes the most costly part of that budget is people's time. And so we're oftentimes trying to cut time, to shave off those extra few days, because time is money. And especially if you've got a tight budget, or if you have a situation like I talked about in that opening module with the Minneapolis Bridge, which was deemed to be structurally deficient, I think was the term back in 1993. It wasn't going to be replaced until 2020. You had a real dilemma there. It was a time issue. It was a money issue. So again, I think those things often go hand in hand. Number 3 and 4 also go hand in hand, the financial security for yourself, for your company. Number 5, we sometimes are pressured to do unethical things, or things that we may perceive as being unethical, because we feel like, hey, if we don't do it the way we're being asked to do it, we may lose our job. It's easy to feel insecure, especially during times when the economy's not doing really well. We feel that we've got to do everything we can do within our power to keep our job, to show our value, and that sometimes does create some ethical challenges and dilemmas. Similarly, wanting to make our boss look good, the desire to constantly be moving ahead, advancing our career, getting that next promotion. We need to be super careful about the types of decisions that we make and how those decisions affect other people in our company, how they affect our clients, our customers. And again, that number one area of the code of ethics, number one canon, how does it affect the safety, health, and well-being of society? Committing safety violations, ignoring wrongdoing you might witness. I'll come back to that one in a minute. And violating the law. Number 9 is important, ignoring wrongdoing that you witness. When you witness wrongdoing within a company, within a job, whether it's a consulting job or you're working for a private company, it is really, really crucial to try to bring that to people's attention, to try to do it in a way that's diplomatic, to try to do it in a way that you're going to be listened to, that you can show people that you want to do the right thing and you want your company to do the right thing, and helping your company see that by not doing the right thing, there is some risk. And I'm just going to say, it's not easy. There are also times when you may be told it's not going to happen often. It may never happen in your career, but you may be told, we know, just be quiet and move on. And you might have heard about the concept of being a whistleblower. That's why we have whistleblower protection. So that when you do witness something, when you do experience something within a company, and you've spent days or weeks or months to try to bring it to people's attention and to try to communicate and to try to help your colleagues, your bosses, your supervisors, your coworkers, you've tried to help them to solve the problem in a constructive way, but you've not been able to make progress, that's when whistleblowers become important to our society and to the profession. Like I said, it doesn't happen that often, but whistleblowers are provided with legal protection. Unfortunately, it can also be a very political thing, like we've seen with whistleblowers in U.S. politics. But we do have whistleblower protection in the United States. This is one of my last slides here. I wanted to just kind of show you how these kind of match up, the sources of pressure and how they match up against the fundamental canons in the code of ethics. I'll just take, again, number 1 and number 2, adhering to a project timeline and keeping it on budget. You possibly have a real conflict in some cases with safety or with the ability to be able to perform that job in ways that truly minimize the risk associated with that particular job. Again, in terms of keeping your job, which is number 5, you might be asked, if you want to keep your job, we want you to make a public statement about an issue or a situation. Again, I think back to some of the statements that were made in the time period leading up to the collapse of the bridge in Minneapolis. There were some real potential conflicts there. So these do sort of relate to each other. I wanted you to know in the data, those top 10, that those are some things you may face in the future, and then how you might think about it in terms of solving some of these ethical dilemmas. In your career, the vast majority of people will want you to behave ethically. I just want to make really, really crystal clear that the vast majority of bosses, supervisors, consulting companies, clients, customers, people who you work for or with, or even people who are in politics or regulation, the vast majority of people want you to behave the right way. They want you to behave ethically. We're all in this together. And especially if you work for a company, really, really good leaders know that those unethical decisions that serve to destroy or undermine trust can not only destroy a product or a person's job, but they can destroy an entire company. And they can destroy it forever if it is a bad enough situation. So again, I don't want to leave you feeling too skeptical about people or too paranoid or jaded that there's a lot of bad people out there in the engineering profession. The bottom line is 99.99% of people are good people and they want to do the right thing, but you do need to know how to act and how to use these fundamental, foundational principles and documents to be able to protect yourself and, again, to protect the public. But in those rare times when ethics becomes an issue, here are some things to think about. Number 1, it can be tough. It can be really stressful. Communicating sometimes can be very challenging. If you're talking about bringing up a really tough situation or something that you have observed or a conversation that you've overheard or an error, somebody's error that you've discovered, you might be 2 or 3 years into a design and you're getting ready to launch a product and you suddenly you discover that there's been an error made. It's really complicated to be able to effectively bring those to people's attention. But you do have the responsibility to act. One of the things that I would always suggest you do is you ask for some help. You find a peer, you find a mentor, you find somebody who you can trust, who will keep that information private until such time that you are ready to talk about it and disclose it. Think carefully about how you want to communicate and how you want to talk about and actually address the issue. I'll say probably there's no really wrong way to do it, but it's always helpful to come forward in a way that you're not casting blame, and also in a way that you've maybe thought about it a little bit in terms of maybe coming up with a suggested solution. And I'll say that too, for those of you who are students and you are upset with team members, or maybe you're upset with a professor or an advisor in a course or a program, and you want to come forward and you want to complain to that person, or you want to bring something to that person's attention, it's always helpful if you can come forward with some positive suggestions on how to make it right. It's always best to communicate in person. I will just tell you to be super, super careful with email. I think if you can bring situations to people's attention and you can communicate that in person in a positive way and resolve the problem, resolve the issue through personal communication, through one-on-one, through conversation, through verbal communication, that's preferred. Do know that anything you put in writing is going to have consequences. Now, if you have tried to explore something, you've tried to bring it forward, you've tried to raise a person's level of attention, you've come forward with positive suggestions and in terms of solving the problem and finding a way to move forward, and you're running up against a roadblock, then it is probably time to put it in writing. It's at least time to write it down in a personal notebook, You probably don't want to go out and broadcast it or publish a news article, but you want to begin at that point to begin to write things down and make sure that you have records and documentation of the things that you've tried to do to solve the problem. Most often people are going to want to do the right thing. As I've talked about, the vast majority of people are good. Document your actions in a written form. I guess I would start with a regular paper notebook initially. That also helps you to get your ideas onto paper, to get the steps and the actions that you want to try to take, the words that you want to try to use. If you're going to have a conversation with the person, you might want to get that written down. And again, like I said, eventually you may end up needing to move that to email so that you have an even deeper paper trail. Sometimes people need to make difficult choices. In my career, I have been faced with some ethical dilemmas where I tried to make some changes and maybe suggest some better ways to do things. I was also at some point in my career, or points in my career, asked to do some things that just didn't really quite fit. They maybe fit the engineering code of ethics, but they didn't quite fit my own personal principles and values. And so in my career, I've had to make a difficult choice or two and actually go someplace different, to a company or to an organization or to a unit that better fit my values, my morals, my personality, and the things that I felt comfortable with. So again, sometimes you can't win these ethical dilemmas. Sometimes you just need to move into a different situation, move yourself out, kind of re-engineer your environment. And generally people are happier when they do things that are better matched with their personal ethics and personal values. Like I talked about, when safety is involved, we do have this notion of whistleblowers protection. That does vary a little bit from state to state. People, for example, who work for the federal government typically have a very formal whistleblower process. So if you are ever faced with that ethical dilemma where you have to kind of out an issue because you have not been able to solve it privately with your boss or for your supervisor or your mentor or whoever it is that you work with, you need to know a little bit more about those principles. So in the final section, we're going to come back and do a quick case study with a young woman named Emily, and I will see you then.